Hello and welcome back. This is the next step in processing the sheepskin for parchment. And I've taken one from the freezer. It has been rinsed and needs a second flushing. And right now the bag is just in a bucket of water, and that is going to defrost over the next couple hours, and then I will rinse it again and probably flush it out tomorrow. As this is thawing, the skin is starting to loosen up, because when it's in that bag it gets all compressed. But it's still sort of a brick on the inside there, and you don't want to pull on it because you could actually rip the skin. They're pretty resilient, but not totally tough. I did not do the second flushing on this one on the beam. I think I'm going to have to do another flushing on it tomorrow before I stretch it, so it may actually end up going back in the water for another day depending on how sturdy it is, because I know I had some of them that weren't that great and they need to go right up on the stretcher, otherwise they will be toast. Got a little hot, and when it gets into the 80s and 90s you can actually risk losing your hide, because the bacteria that deteriorate the fibers you want to keep act faster than the lime does, which dissolve the fibers that you don't want to keep. So that's just something to be aware of. In commercial hide processing they use higher temperatures, like 90-95 degrees, and they almost cook them. They do that in the lime solution. They only have to leave it in the lime solution for a couple days. So you would think that that would be beneficial, but when you're doing a slower process, you're not tumbling them and you're not consistently heating them for several hours, that is not beneficial. So you want to keep your temperatures in like 40s, 50s, 60s to like mid 70s, and then you want to stop. You're also going to want to change the water out several times during this process to keep your hide clean. Best to keep your hide clean all the way through, but sometimes things fall on the ground and get dirty and whatever, but just want to make sure you keep it clean. In order to stretch a hide properly is to find the spine line, because you always want to set up your hide with the spine straight, because that will prevent any weird stretching or bulges or anything like that, especially if the parchment gets slightly damp. In the SCA we do a lot of events outside, and sometimes it's a little moist. Medieval books were kept inside in hard covers. They were literally locked down so that the parchment couldn't buckle. Because of how we are using these things, they go through a lot more than what medieval parchment would have had to endure. So what I've done here is found my neck and put a board right along to the butt, right along that spine line, and I'm hoping that's the spine, but this hide cannot stand up to very much more, so we're going to do a lot of scraping and sanding on it. What we have here is the hide and a little pebble, and you can see that the pebble is approximately the same size as my fingernail. I've put a simple overhand knot in it, just one, and then once I tighten it down I'll do two. And I do this in a different color as an independent tie on the neck, butt, and I do it on each of the 4 legs. Sometimes I end up doing 8 on each individual leg for the corners, and that just gives me a flexible corner. The rest of them I do spiral with holes in them, but this is one of the main medieval techniques where they actually used a pebble. This pebble right here is anchored in the center and tied up, and I try to get this under just a little bit so that doesn't slip out, but usually it doesn't. There's a pretty good swell here. You're going to lose a tiny bit more hide than what you normally would if you're poking a hole, because you need to poke the hole about 1 inch in. This uses maybe like 1.25 inches. So for me to have this at my main points, the butt and the head, this is worth it, because I'm not losing that much. And then it's just tied with a simple bow so that I can get in and out of that. And this is actually, this string is a lot thinner than what I would prefer to use, because I don't get to pull on it as much as I would want to. But with this isn't going to pull out. I can pull on this as much as the string can handle, and this is not going to rip out. Okay, so something terrible just happened, and I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this. I put the neck, see this, where I'm tugging? That center part right there is the neck, and that's actually facing the corner, so I guessed wrong. I was thinking this was the neck right here. That is actually the shoulder. And you can tell that on a sheep because they have these little, I'm following the spine line right there, and they have these little striations that go down their spine line. So what I need to do now is re-tie everything before I go into my lacing. But that's fine because we caught the problem early and I won't have a crooked parchment. Another thing I wanted to talk about is this board that I'm using right here. A lot of people will put this down on a piece of plywood. I actually use two boards. I use a long board there. But what this allows me to do is when I pull on this, I can see the angle that is supposed to go in, that natural stretch is in. And then I can put this at that angle to let me see where I need to tie it. So normally what I would do at this point is to lace up some spiral lacing with little holes and go around the edges in between each of these. But the main issue with this one is I have these gigantic holes in this because the hide was getting a little bit old. So we have these areas. Now what's going to happen right here, especially right through here, is that this is not going to get stretched well. So what I'm going to have to end up doing is putting holes here and here to pull that in, because can you see that this area here is getting stretched, but this is not, and that's my usable parchment. This isn't going to give me anything. So I'm actually going to come inside here and put holes there and stretch it from there, and I may even just cut this right off. Sometimes what you can do is stretch it and then pop another cord in here as an additional tie, but that can get a little bit confusing because then you have a tie going over the top of this and you can't work that area. But since this is all holes anyway, look at this. That's all holes anyway. That's not going to do me any good. As I've snipped holes with the scissors, you could use an awl or a punch or whatever you want, about every 4 inches into the hide. If there was already a hole there, I use that hole. And now what I'm going to do is lace independently between my major ties. So I've got this side all strung up, and what I actually ended up doing was tying knots to make the jute string all one. And there's one over here that I want to show you that shows when you have a corner, a lot of times you're going to have one string coming off at this angle and one string coming off of that angle to get the proper stretch on the hide. Now something else I want to talk about real quick back over here is that right here we've come to a place where this can't go out anymore and that there's no more room to stretch this. These are all right at the edge of the stretcher. So what I'm going to have to do is cut it across here so that I have a couple inches that I can gain in terms of stretching, so that the section on the inside and right across, and you can see that we have the same problem over there, so that has room to have the proper tension on it, and that will make it so that it's not all wobbly when it dries as parchment. This is the flesh side of the hide. And you can see, without me doing the second fleshing, it's kind of nasty. So what we're going to do is use this tool It has a little bit of a blade on it. I start up at the top. You can see how much water is coming out of this. And I try to work fast. And pull as much garbage off of this as possible while it's wet. And I'm at quite an angle. You can see that angle. There we go. That's the angle I'm working at. You aren't going to put a hole through this.